Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Catherine and this is Raspberry Reads. If you are new to my channel and you end up liking this video, please can I encourage you to subscribe so you can find out what I'm reading about and we can chat together. And also it always helps to leave a comment and hit the like button. So today I'm finally getting around to doing a wrap-up video. I don't have time anymore to do a monthly wrap-up, so I decided to do it seasonally. And as we're coming to the close of autumn, I thought now is a good time to do my autumn reads before this video gets too unwieldy. So I read or listened to 11 books, 7 of which were audiobooks. And I would say I had a pretty good few months of reading. I've read some books that will really stick with me and others that were good, but I will be a bit forgetful, I must admit. So the first book that I finished reading was The New Wilderness by Diane. I read this as an ebook and I gave it 4 stars. The New Wilderness is dystopian fiction, also literary fiction. And it took me quite a while to read because I had to keep returning the ebook and wait for the other person to read it and then get it back. And yeah, I really liked this book. It was basically a social experiment where a group of people leave the cities and go into this isolated and contained wilderness setting to see if they can survive in the wilderness without altering the natural state at all. As I mentioned, it's dystopian, so the world is quite chaotic and the cities are, people are not functioning well with disease and poverty and that sort of thing. But most of the story is set in the wilderness, and it's more about how the group of people work out together, their social dynamics. I would say for that reason, one of my main criticisms, I'm a bit croaky today, one of my main criticisms is that I didn't always get a clear sense of the landscape, so like the scene setting. It was a really interesting idea to have it set in the wilderness, and there was a lot of attention to detail about the landscape, but sometimes I felt like the social dynamics and the characters overshadowed the landscape, and then it really could have been set anywhere. And I felt that one of the appealing aspects of this book is the fact that the landscape is sort of a character in and of itself. So yeah, that was one part that I felt could have been a bit stronger. But that being said, it was still a very atmospheric book. There were lots of really unsettling parts. I enjoyed the writing. It was quite punchy at times. She uses very honest and gripping language. And yeah, there were bits where the choice of language really made the experience, if that makes sense. Otherwise, some of the characters I really enjoyed, but others I found that they were a little bit forgettable, and almost as if Diane Cook was trying to do too much. And the other thing that I found difficult is that there were very long chapters. So I tend to struggle with books that are set out that way because I remember the plot and the themes better if I've got sort of segments, but that just might be my sort of personal preference in reading. In terms of themes in the book, I mentioned the sort of social dynamics, but it also is a lot to do with mother-daughter relationships, and it's a coming-of-age story. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed The New Wilderness, and it's up there with one of my favorite dystopians, certainly. And if you haven't read it and you like dystopian, then I would very much recommend it. If you have read The New Wilderness, what did you think? Let me know in the comment section below. If you're wondering why my hand is down here awkwardly, it's because I have Wilbur, my dog, desperate for head strokes, so I'm trying to do 2 things at once. Okay, the next book I listened to was The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny and Murder by David Grann. and I gave this book 3 stars. And so this is a non-fiction book, and it's a history book. And the narrator, I should say, was Diane Graham, and they did a good job narrating it. And so this story is about the real ship, the Wager. This was a British naval vessel in the 1800s. I'll have to put the date on the screen because I can't remember when exactly this was set. And how the Wager sort of gets into difficulties, and then they end up being stranded, and there's a mutiny, and a lot of the book covers afterwards that there's a trial about that, about the mutiny back in England. And so I thought it was an interesting approach to covering a true story, to covering history, in the sense that it was very much a sort of thriller narrative style. David Grann definitely tried to kind of keep you interested and on your toes. So it's not a dry history by any means. And I also, as a tip, would recommend Googling the island where they end up being stranded, because I think it gave me a really helpful context to visualize just how isolated and desolate the area was. That was just helpful for me. And I also really enjoyed that David Grann took the time to insert a small section towards the end about colonialism, the problematic nature of colonialism, and also the unheard voices. So he, told this story from the perspectives that are still present today, that are recorded today, and many of those voices are not heard. One of the bits that I found quite poignant was that there was a black man, I believe, who was a freed slave who then got separated from the group, possibly kidnapped, I can't remember, and as far as they're aware, ended up back in slavery again. And his voice is absent from this. So that's just one example that I appreciated David Grann noting that, because otherwise it can become very European-centric. At times, I found it a little bit hard to follow as an audiobook. I think it might be possibly my preference to actually read it as a print book, and that way I could follow along a little bit better. I also found, from with my sort of historian hat on, that I found at times the author was a little bit too liberal with inserting quotations to kind of back up his narrative, which were contemporary to the time, but not always incredibly relevant to the story or the topic. And then at the end, I must admit, I got a little bit bored. So it's when they're back in England and talking about the trial, I lost interest a bit. So that's why I gave this book 3 stars instead of perhaps 4. But yeah, if you are really into British naval history, hi Wilbur, and narratives about, popular narratives about history, then you might enjoy The Wager, but otherwise perhaps it's one to miss. Yeah, let me know your thoughts below. Right, next up we have a book that I read for my book club, and that is The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd. And I loved this book. I thought it was fabulous. It was very popular at the time it came out, I think in the early 2000s. And I would still very much recommend reading it. I gave it 4 stars, and it's a historical fiction, and also literary fiction. And I loved the scene setting in this. So this takes place in 1964 in one of the Carolinas, South Carolina. And it's just at the precipice of the civil rights movement. So it's got a lot of really interesting history and context about that, and race relations, racial tensions, prejudices, that sort of thing. It is a coming-of-age novel, and it's about, the main character's name is Lily Owens, and she basically has to run away from home and ends up going and staying with a sisters who have bees. That's their main job, is they're beekeepers. And from there, you've got lots of themes about friendship, about family, found family, I guess, mother-daughter relationships. There's a lot of discussion about Lily's mother and what happens to her. There are themes of religion, race, abuse, mental health. Yeah, it basically covers so much. You name it, it's probably in this book. And I thought that Sue Kid did a really good job with those topics. Sometimes she perhaps included a little bit too much and didn't sort of flesh it out at the end, but especially towards the end of the book, I think it kind of dragged a little bit in the middle and then a lot happened at the end. So the pacing of the book could have been a little bit better. But yeah, she certainly covered a lot of topics. And in terms of things that I particularly enjoyed, I liked the detail about the bees. Sue Kid obviously did quite a bit of research about bees and beekeeping. And I also liked the descriptions of the sisters. I really enjoyed them as characters. And yeah, I guess the last thing I should say is there is a book, pardon me, there is a film based off of this book that I think has Queen Latifah in it. And I would now like to watch that film because I enjoyed this book so much. So yeah, have you read The Secret Life of Bees? And if so, what did you think? And if you haven't read it yet, then this is one that I would recommend adding to your TBR. All right, the next book that I want to talk about, and coincidentally, it's also a book that we just read for our book club and just had our conversation about it, and that's Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And I gave this book 5 stars, which I don't often do, and this is a literary fiction, and I suppose could be historical fiction, depending on how you define historical fiction. And what I mean by that is that it's set sort of from the 80s forward. So if you count 80s and 90s as historical fiction, then it would be. And this is a coming of age book, sort of, and it's also a book mostly about friendship and love through friendship. Between two friends, Sadie Green and Sam Mazer, and they are two friends that end up sort of coming in and out of each other's lives, and they end up making computer games together in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and most of the book is very much about the computer game making, creating process. So if you're not into computer games, and this was one of the points that several people said in our book club, is that if you don't care about computer games, you might find those sections a bit tedious. Indeed, some of my co-workers actually skipped those sections. I grew up at that time, and I did play computer games, and so there was a huge nostalgia factor. So I would say that I'm probably the prime audience for this book, and that's why partly I gave it 5 stars, is that it just ticks all those boxes for me. But it might not for people who couldn't care less about computer games. But nonetheless, the feedback that I got from my colleagues is that even if you don't like computer games, it's such a beautiful story about love and friendship that it's still worth reading. I thought that the writing was really good. I thought that there were important elements to this book about disability, religion, and race. Whether or not those were kind of included to sell the book a little bit more to a modern audience, I don't know. But I did appreciate that, for example, one of the characters did have a disability, and they both come from different faiths and different racial identities as well. I should say that I did listen to this book on audio, and that was really good narration by Jennifer Kim. There was a second narrator because there's a different perspective. And I won't go into that, but I didn't like that narrator, but I did enjoy Jennifer Kim's narration. Yeah, so overall, I loved Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. And if you, like me, grew up in the 90s, played computer games, and like literary fiction, then it's definitely one to check out. The next book that I wanted to talk about is Treacle Walker, and that was by Alan Garner. And I mean, I gave it 2 stars, and my notes say, WTF was this? I had no clue what was going on, and yeah, I listened to it on audiobook, and I was listening to it while I was doing some arts and crafts, which in retrospect, I don't think this is the type of book that you can sort of just have playing passively in your ear. I think you actually need to pay attention intently to it, otherwise you'll miss a lot of things. It's not very long, and it uses loads of British colloquialisms, but I think British colloquialisms specific to the north of England and perhaps of, I don't know, a long time ago. I'm making an assumption about that, but I didn't know what half of what was being said was meant by it, if that makes sense. And I've lived in the UK for over a decade. But yeah, so it's basically about a boy. So it's not really a coming of age story, but it's about a boy named Joe. He's got some sort of problem with his eye, and he ends up forming a friendship with a man called Treacle Walker, who's a wanderer, a rag and bone man, and how they sort of come to terms with their struggles, and Joe's self-consciousness about his eye issue. And as I read some reviews about this, and somebody pointed out that they felt that this book requires a knowledge of British folklore. Now, I do know quite a bit about British folklore, but I clearly don't know anything about the folklore related to this story. So I would say, unless you live in England or have an extensive knowledge of British folklore and colloquialisms of the north of England, then this book probably won't make a lot of sense to you. I think it could be a useful one if you were studying it, like in an English literature class, and that you could then sort of pick it apart slowly. It has a very sort of like Beowulf element to it, although obviously not that long. So I think it has some merit in that context, and I wish I could understand it better, but it just did not resonate with me whatsoever. So yeah, that one is definitely a miss, and I would not be recommending it to my audience. Next up, we have Matrix, which is by Lauren Groff, and I gave this 3 stars. This is historical fiction, and I read it as an ebook. Matrix is mainly set in a convent, like a nunnery, and it's set in the medieval period, yeah, during the Crusades. I had mixed feelings on this one. I really enjoyed it, but it was kind of a slog, and I think relating to what I just said about Treacle Walker, I didn't get a lot of the references. It's set in a Catholic setting, and there was a lot to do with the points of the day of different services and prayers and all of that stuff. And I do not have a religious background, particularly a Catholic background, so a lot of that stuff was just lost on me. And in terms of the plot, the premise of the story, it was really interesting that the main character ends up being the prioress of the convent, and she is descendant from a family of strong women fighting in the Crusades, a French background, and she ends up connected to Eleanor of Aquitaine, and then is sent to live in this convent, and most of the story is her sort of life from coming to the convent all the way through. And yeah, so it's got lots of really interesting bits about relationships, female friendship, women's empowerment, and lots of interesting commentary about women within the church and the power or lack of power they had, and how the character wants to change that. Her name is Marie, I believe. The ending seemed a little bit artificial, and my main criticism about the writing is that it was more telling rather than showing, so it was quite descriptive. And so for that reason, it took me a while to get through, because you kind of get bogged down in the details. It is quite a long chronology. Lots of detail about the Crusades and life on the convent, religious things, religious history as well. So yeah, it was good. And I would say if you are particularly interested in that time period, yeah, let's just say interested in that time period, because on the face of it, that time period does have a lot of religion in it, then it is one to check out, absolutely. Next up is Atonement by Ian McEwan, and I've been meaning to get to this for ages, and it happened to be that the audiobook was available right at the point that I was looking for something fairly short, which it is. And I should say right off the bat that I gave it 5 stars. So Atonement is literary and historical fiction. I read Ian McEwan's Solar and loved that. So I went in knowing that I was going to like the writing style, which I did. The narrator was named Josephine Bailey. She also did a fantastic job. And yeah, if you're not familiar with Atonement, it's set in England in the summer of 1935. It's a coming of age story, mainly set around 2 sisters. So Bryony is the main character, and she's got an older sister named Celia. And in this sort of point in time, they're at this estate, this fancy house, and Bryony witnesses something, and then decisions are made about a supposed crime, and Bryony has to live with the consequences of what she said that she thought she saw. And so it's very much about living with the hope for absolution, living with shame. Lots of discourse about sort of classism, family pride tied into that, and kind of the like unreliable witness narrative. I more so enjoyed the second half of it, which was set during the Second World War, and the sisters are adults and they're serving as nurses. And the ending was absolutely fantastic, because that's set in present day at the time the book was written, and it was a twist that I wasn't expecting, and yeah, it just completely like hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh wow, that was a really good idea to finish the story that way. I love Ian McEwan's writing. His character building is always fantastic, and I was just immersed in the story. I'm pretty sure there's a film version of Atonement, which I might check out at some point. But yeah, 5 stars from me. I'm looking forward to reading something next by Ian McEwan, because he's just an author that I really get on with. Yeah, have you read Atonement? If so, let me know your thoughts below. Right, I am powering through because my voice is getting croakier and croakier by the second. So the next book that I listened to was The Pachinko Parlour, and that was by Elisa Shua Dusapin, and the translator is Anissa Abbas Higgins. And the audio book was narrated by Hannah Choi. This was a short book. It's a literary fiction, but also I guess you could call it short story as well. And I gave it 3 stars. It's basically like a character study, and it reminds me a lot of Lost in Translation, the film with Scarlett Johansson in it, and Bill Murray, in the sense that it's these 2 unlikely characters coming together in Tokyo, with cultural differences, and dealing with the complexities of their own family relationships. So yeah, there's similarities there. And it's about a young woman named Claire, who is Korean, but was raised in Switzerland. And she's visiting her grandparents in Tokyo, her Korean grandparents in Tokyo, who run a pachinko parlor. and Claire ends up being a tutor for Mieko, who's a young Japanese girl, tutoring her French over this small summer period. And it's a lot about identity and culture. And yeah, as I said, it's sort of just like a character study, just this moment of time snapshot. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it's sort of short and sweet. It was quite an abrupt ending to the point that I was listening to it and didn't realize that it had finished. But nonetheless, yeah, it was just a good story. So 3 stars from me. All right, we've got three books left. I'm just gonna, keep going. So the next one was The Second Lady Silverwood, and that's by Emma Orchard. This is a historical romance, erotic fiction. It was also labeled as, and the narrator is Jessica Elisa Boyd. I gave it 3 stars. So this is set in the Regency period in England. And so if you like Bridgerton, then this would definitely be up your street. I found it to be very much with similar vibes to Jane Eyre or like Rebecca, Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. So it's got a really good premise in the sense that it's about Kate, I think her name is. I can't even remember the characters' names, but yes, this woman who ends up being an Italian tutor for an army colonel, soldier, military man's daughter, and he has tragically lost his wife, and you find out kind of the story behind that. Anyways, I don't think it's giving it too much away that the tutor and the military man get together, and there's lots of sexual tension there. And so the whole idea of them getting together and exploring each other was interesting. And then it kind of just fell apart at the end. And it was just like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And it was basically like a telenovela crammed into a Regency period historical romance that got a bit farcical at the end. And it's a bit forgettable. I mean, it was, good steam, but not much substance beyond that, to be honest. So 3 stars for me, only because the steam writing was pretty good. Birnam Wood is the next one. My goodness, I've been trying to get through this book for ages. So Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton. I've been working on this since the summer, and this is a really hard book to explain to people because there's so much in it. It's incredibly dense, but it's set in New Zealand. It is literary fiction. It's about a, what do you call them? An activist collective. So it's a group of people who are guerrilla gardeners. So by that, I mean they go and they cultivate sort of vacant properties or underappreciated plots of land. And Birnam Wood, with the main characters, Mira is one of the main characters. I can't remember the other woman's name. Shelley is the other character. So yeah, it very much follows Mira and Shelley, who are kind of the leaders of Birnam Wood. And then there's also 2 wealthy people who have a property in a sort of conservation area. And then there's also a character who's a billionaire, an American billionaire named Lemoyne. And the whole thing is about how all of these people come together. And it's incredibly complicated, but also brilliant. So I would say that this book is about ambition and power. It's about politics. It's about intellectual ideas. It was really challenging to read in the sense that there are no chapters. There's 3 parts to it. And the first bit is first third is all about character development. So you're learning about Mira and Shelley and their difficult relationships. And then there's another character whose name I can't remember now. Again, so many characters. Tony. Tony is a journalist. He was involved with Birnam Wood and then kind of goes off piste to do his own thing. You're getting to know the tensions amongst those people, and at the same time, you're also learning about the Dervishes, who are the property owners, wealthy people, and their relationship with Lemoyne, who supposedly wants to develop this area called in the Thorndike, which is this fictional national nature reserve area in New Zealand. And then, yeah, the second bit is sort of like the scene setting in the second third, where all of these people are starting to come together and you're trying to figure out how they're all going to interact with each other in Thorndike, in this area, on this property development. And then the third part is when all of the action happens. And so when I started off by saying it took me forever to read it, is because the first third was so tedious, trying to get to the point. What is going on? I didn't want to just read about these characters and their bitchiness with each other. And then it slowly picks up momentum, and by the last third I was like, oh my goodness, what's going on? So you really need to have perseverance when reading this. And I would say the last 20 pages is when the majority of the action happens. So from that perspective, I think that this book loses people, and again would lose a star from me, which is why I only gave it 4 stars, because the pacing was off. It took too long to get going, and she was covering too much in the first 2/3 and left kind of the point of the story too late at the end. I'm not going to go into much more than that, because I think this is one of those books that if you would like to read it, you kind of need to go in on your own and read it, and it is worth it, but you need to take your time with it and really persevere getting through half of the book, I would say, before it picks up, which is a disappointment with the pacing. But yeah, so still really good. Lots of food for thought, especially if you like to read things with sort of political, intellectual commentary. Yeah, Eleanor Catton definitely has some interesting writing from that perspective. Okay, and then last but not least is a book that I just finished listening to on audiobook, and that's The Lost Rainforests of Britain by Guy Shrubsole, and this came out a couple of years ago. I gave this 4 stars, and this is a nonfiction nature book, and it's also a bit of a memoir. And Guy Shrubsole basically looks at folklore and literature and sustainability and human connection to rainforests in Britain. And a lot of it has to do with how the rainforests were lost in the first place, attempts at rewilding, and his main project was that he did citizen science, like crowd sourcing, to map out all of the existing rainforests, what people think are rainforests throughout Britain, so that he could basically create this map that he has. So it's a really fascinating case study. And I mentioned this book in another video where I was talking about that I take rainforests for granted, because in Vancouver it's full of temperate rainforests. And so from that perspective, it is disheartening to realize how much of that landscape has been lost in England. I think that this book would be better read rather than listened to, and dipping in and out of it, because I couldn't keep track of all the detail, and that there was lots of really interesting things to say, but when you're sort of tired and just passively listening to something before you fall asleep, I think I lost a lot of the interesting points that Guy Shrubsole was trying to convey. I think you need to be interested in plants in order to appreciate this book, but otherwise, I really would rate it. So yeah, 4 stars, with the caveat that you should probably read it rather than listen to it. And that is my whirlwind tour of all of the books that I read from end of August, September maybe, all the way through to the last day of November, I think. Yeah, have you read any of these books? If so, what did you think? Are any of them on your TBR? And has my review of them encouraged you to move them sort of higher or lower or take them off your TBR? Let me know. I'm looking forward to doing my winter reads, and I will probably put a video up in early January talking about the books that I'd like to get to during the winter. I'm not quite sure of the timing of all my videos, but I think this is going to be my last video before Christmas. So that being said, I hope that you all have a wonderful holiday season. I'm probably going to take a week or two off just to spend time with family, and then be back in the new year with all of those great videos like reading goals, wrap up for 2024, anticipated reads for 2025, all of that good stuff. But yeah, so I'm going to take the time now to just wish you good health and happiness during the festive season and into the new year. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas if you celebrate, and I will see you soon in 2025 with lots of new videos. Okay, take care.